at the end of previous lecture. I had showed you that B is defined as del cross A, which means H is 1 upon mu del cross A. And then I substituted this definition back into Maxwell's equations, at least one of them. And I figured out another definition which was involving the other potential V. And that definition was E equal to minus del V minus A dot. Dot means time derivative. Okay. Now these two potentials need to be known in terms of rho and J. Then it's easy to figure out E and H based on these equations that we have got. For the static case, time derivative is not there. It's zero actually. So the definition for V simplifies to the well-known formula E equal to minus del V. For e to the power j omega t type of time dependence, obviously d by dt becomes j omega. So things become little different when it comes to definitions of A and V. The straightforward. Even the Maxwell's equations assume a different form. You know all this already. Now, how do you figure out formulas for A and V? There are two different methods. One is based on intuition. Based on things that we know in electrostatics and magnetostatics. That means non-time varying electrical analysis and magnetic analysis. Based on that, we can generalize our understanding to time varying cases. And another approach is purely mathematical. And these two hopefully would converge with each other. The physical approach or intuitive approach is here. Let's assume that we have a cylindrical, or actually we have a 3D surface, conducting surface, carrying a charge density on its surface, a charge density inside it and a current density on the surface. Okay. Take a small volume, elemental volume, d. By the way, for volume, I am using V with a prime on it. That's the symbol, because V itself is reserved for scalar potential. So volume will be denoted by V prime. I take a small volume dV prime somewhere inside the surface. And let's say the origin of the coordinate system is somewhere else. It's a generic description right now. Origin is at O. The distance of dV prime from the origin, this is known as source coordinate, because source is dV prime. So that coordinate is going to be denoted by R prime, vector of course. The point of observation P is at a distance from the origin, and that distance vectorially will be denoted by small r. It's basically position vector of P. And the direct distance between source and point of observation will be denoted by capital R. This is also a vector in general. It is obvious if you look at the triangle involved that R prime vector plus capital R vector minus R vector is 0. Look at the directions. That we have taken. So essentially what it means is this. Capital R is small r minus small r prime. And if you take magnitudes on both sides, then capital R's magnitude is magnitude of R vector minus R prime vector. These are the definitions for the formulas that are about to follow. Now, for this case, electrostatics and magnetostatics have got formulas for A and V already. They are actually available in many books, including Jordan and Baldwin's book, which I'll be sharing with you electronically soon. Those formulas need to be generalized for time varying cases. Let us consider a 3D conducting surface carrying current density J on surface and volume charge density rho inside. I've said all this already. It's written once again in plain English. Okay, so these formulas are already shown in the previous page also, but here they are shown along with an equation number. Now the formulas that we see in books for V and A for non-time varying cases are equation 20 and 21. V as a function of R vector and A as a function of R vector, assuming that mu and epsilon of the medium are known. By default, we would assume air medium or free space in any case. Now, if these formulas are given to us, it is intuitive that if you see in these formulas, rho and J are not varying with time. So it is almost obvious that if they start varying with on the left hand also in both equations, you should see time variations. That's intuitive. So based on that intuition, people modified those formulas like this. We simply introduce T variable on left side as well as on the right side. Fair enough, nothing too difficult to believe. Then what? Our job is to capture reality. One reality which is missed out in these formulas is that any time-related changes in rho and J will be reflected in V and A not instantaneously, but after a certain time interval, because there is a finite speed of propagation with which waves propagate. So to capture that reality, the symbolism was further modified to these formulas. We have included a minus term in time on the right hand side, and that term is simply magnitude of R divided by speed of propagation, which means time delay between the two things. Okay. So these are generic formulas for calculating V and A for time varying rho and J. These are the ones that need to be used to analyze radiation problems. They are known as retarded potentials because we have included the effect of time delay between source and effect. There's a retardation between the effect and the source in both cases. These are known as retarded potential. These two formulas that you see here, equation 24 and 25, are said to represent retarded potentials, where finite speed of propagation has been accounted for. It's all intuitive right now. No proofs. Okay. Now, second approach is based on Maxwell's equations. Let's see what it does. If you recall the definitions of A and V, you will see that Maxwell's equation 4 was already employed. And I think equation 1 was also employed when we defined A and V. Equation 1, Maxwell's equation 1 and Maxwell's equation 4 were used in defining A and V here. But equation 2 and 3 were not used at all. That means del cross H equation and del dot D equation were not used. So if we do that now and use the definitions of A and V that we have already gone through, what happens? Some more info should be coming out for sure. I know this is a little bit tricky part. We have to go through it once. After that, the results will be available for us to use for the rest of the course. You don't have to do the derivations again and again. Okay. So if I use equations, whatever numbers, for defining A and V, in equation 2, which is Maxwell's equation 2, del cross H equal to D dot plus J. For H, I put 1 upon mu del cross A on the left hand side. D dot is epsilon times E dot. That means epsilon times dE by dt. And that is related to V by what I have written within the brackets on the right hand side. E is minus del V minus A dot. We have defined that also. So this equation seems to be giving something new to us based on the two definitions of A and V. And J, of course, will be there. We have the identity for on the left hand side. If you take mu away and take it on the right hand side, you have del cross A, which is identically equal to minus del square A plus del of del dot A. It's one of the well-known identities in vectors. So if I use that on the left side, and on the right hand side, because mu is being transferred on the right hand side, I'll get mu epsilon. You can go through the math carefully later also. Minus del square A of del dot minus mu epsilon. So yeah, I've taken minus out. So minus mu epsilon is out. Within the brackets, I'm getting del of V dot, because d by dt means V dot. And d by dt of A, d by dt of dA by dt will become second order time derivative. So A double dot here. It's a very interesting equation that's coming out. Maxwell's equation 2 is leading to something very interesting. This further simplifies to this complicated equation, equation 26. It has both the unknowns, A and V, in it. And okay, only J is there, rho is not there, fortunately. Only one of the sources is there. Okay, so that's one equation. How about Maxwell's equation number 3? If we apply that to our definitions of A and V, del dot D equal to rho, that means del dot E equal to rho divided by epsilon. And E is minus del V minus A dot. That's the way it is defined. Substituting all that, I get equation 27, which is not as complicated as equation 26, but still, it is something new. This equation, unfortunately, also involves both V and A. So 26 and 27, based on EM theory, should be solved to calculate A and V for a given pair of rho and J. Let me put them together if possible. Hope you can read it. 26 and 27. It's good for mathematicians to come up with all this. It's not easy for the rest of us to move forward. These are virtually impossible to solve. How do you solve these coupled equations? These are coupled equations, by the way. Both equations have both the unknowns. And del square, etc. are involved. And time derivatives are also there. It is very difficult to solve these equations directly, even after we have introduced the concept of potentials. Mathematicians spent a lot of time in Europe in those days, and somebody showed, I think it was Lorentz, who showed that 26 and 27 have infinite number of solutions. I'm not going to bother proving all this. However, he saw light at the end of the tunnel as well in terms of moving forward. What he did was, he showed somehow, there are research papers by him on this. He showed that if you want only that solution out of those infinite number of solutions, if you are looking only for that solution, which involves retarded potentials, then A and V should also satisfy an additional condition, and he called it Lorentz-Gauge condition. Actually, when I was taught all this long time ago in IIT Kanpur, I had a fight with my professor as well. I said, how can you become so arbitrary after this? He said, it's not arbitrary. They have shown it that if you want retarded potential type of solutions, A and V are not independent. They are related to each other. It has been shown based on continuity equation, etc. So we will take advantage of what has been done by others. As engineers, our job is to move forward without losing accuracy, of course. What Maxwell showed that for retarded potential type of solutions, A and V are also related by this additional equation 28. And he said, put it back in the equations 26 and 27 and move forward. In fact, if you look at this equation once again, Lorentz-Gauge condition says del dot A is minus mu epsilon V dot. If I put that in equation 26 and simplify, you can verify it for yourself. I have done this verification several times. I get an independent equation in A involving only J on the right hand side. Decoupling has occurred. Similarly, if you use Lorentz-Gauge condition in equation 27, there also decoupling occurs. You get equation 30. So what has happened is Lorentz-Gauge condition has helped us in coming up with independent equations for A and V, assuming that we are interested only in retarded potential type of solutions. And you also see that A is purely dependent on J and V is purely dependent on rho, which is nice to know. And by the way, if you assume time dependence as e to the power j omega t, second order time derivatives will become minus omega square. So what you are getting really in that case is del square A plus omega square mu epsilon A equal to minus mu j, and del square V plus omega square mu epsilon V equal to minus rho upon E. This is very similar to wave equation that we saw in case of waveguides, etc. Even for plane waves, we saw this. So even radiation is not that different, when it comes to the end product of mathematics. Again, you are seeing wave equation here. Okay. Now, what has been done further is that intuitively derived formulas that I showed in the beginning, these ones, have been put back in these two independent equations that we have got for A and B. And it has been shown that those formulas indeed satisfy these analytical equations that we have got. So that completes the loop. Intuitively obtained formulas actually satisfy the independent equations that we have got, equation 30 and 29. I'm not proving it, but it's done in the book. So whichever way you look at it, we seem to be justified in using equations 24 and 25. They are now analytically supported also, not only supported by intuition, but analytically also they seem to be correct. They are solutions to those two equations that we have got using Maxwell's equations. Further to all this, it has also been shown that if you are specifically interested in e to the power j omega t type of time dependence, the formulas to use are actually these. If you know j, that time delay is gone, it has been replaced by e to the power minus j beta r. Beta is 2 pi upon lambda. There's a proof for this, but I'm avoiding it. These are the formulas that will become the bottom line for us most of the time, 33 and 34. And in some cases, maybe 24 and 25. If e to the power j omega t type of time dependence is not given, then you go for 24 and 25. If e to the power j omega t type of time dependence is given, then you go for 33 and 34. This judgment call has to be yours. Blindly don't assume this is the correct formula. Depending on whether you are being asked to use e to the power j omega t type of dependence in sources or not, you use a different set of formulas for A and B. In fact, the reality is that you don't even have to calculate V. If you know A, it is generally possible to move forward because B is del cross A and H is 1 upon mu del cross A. So if you know A, you can calculate H, and then you can use one of the Maxwell's equations to directly calculate E. You don't need V really. But there are people who still want to figure out both A and V. That is also okay. Different ways of doing the same thing. I prefer to work with only A and then jump to Maxwell's equations to figure out E. From A, I go to H, and from there I use one of the Maxwell's equations to figure out E. That's my method, and book also does it most of the time. So these are the formulas, please be aware of. I'll be reproducing them as and when necessary. Now some simple problems based on all this. Have a look at it for a minute. Think about how to solve this. Then I'll give you the solution. I'll give you a minute or two. It's an identity that we are supposed to prove based on what we have done so far. What they're indirectly telling you that if you know A, you can directly calculate E using this identity. You don't have to worry about calculating H at all. But how to prove this? That is the issue right now. The proof actually is quite simple. We have got these equations. H is 1 upon mu del cross A. That's the way it is defined. E is minus del V minus j omega A. That is the way V is defined, right? Assuming e to the power j omega t variation. And Lorentz-Gauss condition is there also, del dot A equal to minus j omega mu epsilon V. That V dot is gone. Instead, now we have got minus j omega because e to the power j omega t dependence is there. So what you do is use Lorentz-Gauss condition to write equation 4. And then use this 4 in equation 2 to get the result that they want. That's it. Simple proof. Okay, one more derivation type of challenge. Show this one. E is related to A and J in this case. This is also fairly straightforward to prove. Del cross H is J omega epsilon E plus J. That's one of the Maxwell's equations. That gives you, the second equation is the very definition of A. So if you use 2 in 1, you get the result here. And then we use the identity. And you don't need to use identity. Actually, this result directly leads to what you are supposed to prove. This is even simpler than the previous one. Okay. So I think that's the end of this document. Essentially, we have gone through the derivations that we will need for the analysis of antennas. Now, the real work. How to apply all this to the analysis of antennas. The simplest example of antenna is a very thin and very small piece of wire, conducting wire. It is known as AC element, Hertzian dipole, etc., etc. We will assume that it is at the origin of the coordinate system. One end perfectly at the origin, the other end slightly above the origin, and we assume that the antenna, the thin piece of wire, is lined up along the z-axis. That's the assumption we are going to make. How do you analyze this case? 1 minute. The cross-section of the wire is assumed to be very small. So we will ignore the effect of cross-section on the analysis. It is almost like infinitely thin piece of wire. And we would assume e to the power j omega t type of time dependence in the current that's somehow flowing in the wire. That somehow actually depends on how you feed the antenna. We'll talk about all that later. Feeding mechanisms are themselves a big challenge in antennas. We will assume the mathematical formula for current as I e to the power j omega t. And I'm writing dl here because I'm assuming that the length of the wire is dl, a very small length. I've not shown that dimension otherwise, but it is included in the description of the antenna itself. The vectors, or other unit vectors if you want, or components of vectors are also shown here. I'm not showing everything, by the way, in this diagram. I'm only showing ER and E theta. E phi is perpendicular to both ER and E theta. You can try to imagine that. And HR, H theta, H phi also will be there. They are not shown so that the diagram is not too cluttered. Now, the origin happens to be the same as the antenna location. So, capital R and small r will be almost the same. Okay. The formula to use for capital A is this, because we have got e to the power plus j omega t type of time dependence. And you are supposed to use a volume integral to calculate the total A. Fortunately, in this case, cross-section is negligible in dimensions. So volume integral reduces to a line integral. If you want, we can prove it rigorously also, but intuitively you can see the point, right? That is a line integral that you should be doing. And now on top of it, the current is constant. We are assuming that there is no effect of Z on the value of I, because antenna is small enough in the Z direction. So the volume integral actually produces only IDL. I've written it very well. I've tried at least to write it as well as I could. Why the volume integral simply becomes a line integral? By the way, whenever you see a prime on the coordinate, it means you're talking about source. Antenna is the source here. So I'm saying line integral with Z prime. That means I'm talking about current on the antenna, not the observed behavior of the antenna. So this essentially, and capital R is approximately equal to small r as long as the length of the antenna is not too large. With all that, the value of A turns out to be this, equation 5. A will have only Z component. A is going to have the same direction that the antenna current has. Antenna current also has only Z component. So A would also have a Z component. That's obvious. The formula for AZ turns out to be IDL e to the power minus j beta small r divided by small r and mu by 4 pi after that. So the formula for AZ is actually, by the way, I'm assuming air medium, so I'm putting mu naught. AZ turns out to be mu naught IDL e to the power minus j beta small r upon 4 pi small r. If the antenna were not located at the origin, we would have used capital R, not small r. Now, once you know AZ, you have to move to spherical coordinate system now. And I have proven these equations in the previous lecture that if you have a vector which has only Z component, AR, A theta, and A phi are given by these equations. Even physically, you can see it actually. If you go back to the diagram, AZ is along the Z axis. If you want AR, it will be AZ cos theta. It's obvious, right? If you want A theta, it will be minus AZ sin theta, because theta is actually directed this in the direction that you are seeing, while AZ sin theta will be oppositely directed. So minus sign comes in. And because it has got only Z component, A phi will not be there, because XY plane is at 90 degree with Z axis. Okay. So even physically, these formulas are justifiable. The conversion from AZ to AR, A theta, A phi is reasonably simple. On top of it, because of the physics of the problem involved, we would assume that d by d phi is 0 throughout. It's the same wire which is uniformly which is uniform in geometry in the phi direction. So d by d phi will be assumed to be 0 throughout in this particular case. This will help in simplifying the mathematics. Okay, now you know A. You know that it has only R and Z, theta components. It has no phi component. Next challenge is, this is step number 1, to figure out A for the given antenna, which we have done with some loss of accuracy because of the assumptions, but by and large we are okay. Second step is to figure out H. Based on this definition, H equal to 1 upon mu naught del cross A. A has only AR and A theta component. the curl of A has three components, right? R, theta, and phi. The R component of curl of A is related to R component of H by this equation, which is in front of you. And similarly, the theta component is also related to the theta component of del cross A, and so on. So let's look at HR first. The formula for del cross A's R component is reproduced here from the previous document. Del cross AR is actually 1 upon R sine theta multiplied by whatever you are seeing within the brackets. And mu naught has come in because we are looking at 1 upon mu naught in the beginning. Now, we know that d by d phi is 0. So the last term goes away. But we have also seen in this particular case, a phi is 0. So actually, for the antenna that we are looking at, as long as it is at the origin, HR is 0. No R component of H field. This may not be true all the time in all cases, but in this particular case, this happens to be the truth. Okay, how about H theta? Yeah, this is what we have assumed. H theta would be similarly given by 1 upon mu naught del cross A theta component, which I am trying to do here. And here also, by the way, the equation for theta component of curl is taken from the previous document. Here also, because in one case you have d by d phi, and which is 0. In the second case, you have got a phi involved, which is 0. So interestingly, H theta is also 0. Ah, Mr. Hertz. Hopefully, the third H component will not be 0. Otherwise, there is no point doing all this. Let's look at H phi. At least I'm hoping it will not be 0. The formula for H phi is obviously 1 upon mu naught phi component of del cross A. And that component is given here. 1 upon R T by dr of R A theta minus dAr by d theta. Okay. This will not be 0, I think. 1 upon mu naught R is obviously going to be outside the bracket. D by dr of R A theta. A theta is minus AZ sine theta. And AZ is this equation. Now it becomes interesting. A bit of derivations are required here. I have tried to do it as much as I could in detail. Minus sign is there because A theta is minus AZ sine theta. So minus has gone out. And AR is AZ cos theta. So this minus also remains. So both the minuses come out. Actually, I have not done that. I have kept plus sign outside, and within the brackets, I have kept minus sign in both the terms. I have substituted the value of AZ that we have got. Book doesn't show all this in detail, so that's why I had to do it carefully. In one case, you have partial derivative with respect to R. In the second term, you have got partial derivative with respect to theta. Mu naught IDL divided by 4 pi is a constant. It will come out. No issue with that. And mu naught actually would cancel with the mu naught in the denominator of what you have got outside. And minus sign is also coming out now. Try to do it yourself after you get my notes. Make sure I have made no mistakes. First term into differential of the, no, actually it's d by dr. So sine theta will come out in the first case. You'll get minus j beta e to the power minus j beta. Simple. In the second case, all the terms containing r will come out and cos theta will differentiate to minus sine theta. So I think I'm okay. And then I take out the common term, which is already out actually, idl by 4 pi r. E to the power minus j beta r is also common throughout. That also comes out. Within the brackets, I get j beta sine theta plus sine theta divided by r. So the result for h phi is I dl sine theta divided by 4 pi, the entire thing multiplied by j beta plus 1 upon r. And of course, then you have e to the power minus j beta r divided by r. This is the formula for h phi for a Hertzian dipole. Thank God, at least this component preferred not to be zero. Okay, so that's second step. Third step is to figure out E, right? Several methods. You can use one of the identities we have seen in the previous document, or what I do is I use del cross H equal to d dot plus J. And J is zero because J's effect is already included in the previous derivations. So if I use this, ER is 1 upon j omega epsilon naught multiplied by R component of del cross H. Now remember, HR is 0, H theta is 0, but H phi is not 0. And I'm reusing the formula for curl. So second component goes to 0 because H theta is 0 or even d by d phi is 0. Whichever way you want to do it, you will get second term disappearing. The first term does not disappear because H phi is not 0. And a bit of mathematics is involved here. We get a fairly complicated equation for ER. Go through this derivation carefully later also. The equation for ER, by the way, nobody can remember these formulas. It is impossible, but they are there for you to look at. ER actually turns out to be of the shape shown at the end of this page. It has now cos theta term, not sine theta. For H phi, we saw sine theta. For ER, actually, it is cos theta term that's coming out. And within the brackets also, you are seeing something very interesting. 2 beta plus 2 upon JR. Epsilon naught is also there. Of course, it has to be there for sure. So you are getting what you are getting. Cannot help it. How about E theta? Oh, actually, I have simplified ER even further. Yeah, what I did was beta upon omega epsilon naught is something that I have taken out. I have taken beta upon omega epsilon naught and within the brackets I have put 2 plus 2 upon 2 j beta r. So beta is out from the terms within the brackets, within the bracket. Okay, so that equation is reshaped a little bit here. And beta upon omega epsilon naught is something that you may want to look at carefully. Beta is 2 pi upon lambda. which is also omega multiplied by square root of mu naught epsilon naught for air medium or for free space. And omega epsilon naught is there. You simplify this, you actually get eta naught, the famous 120 pi ohm term that we saw in engineering electromagnetics. Intrinsic impedance of air or free space is actually involved in ER. Nice to know that, nothing wrong with it. So I rewrite ER in a form which is actually given in the book. Book doesn't have the other formula that I got. Book doesn't mention this formula for ER. They actually give this formula in terms of eta naught. No matter what, e to the power minus j beta r divided by r is there in all the terms. That is always the reality. Okay. How about E theta? Sorry, yeah. Just a minute. Yeah, we are continuing with ER right now. Now let's go to E theta. Again, lot of derivations. First term goes to 0 because d by d phi is not there. Second term is not 0. I put the value of h phi. You can verify these derivations. I got a fairly complicated equation for E theta also. Which actually simplifies further to this formula. This is given in the book. So what we have seen is HR is 0, H theta is 0, H phi is not 0, ER is not 0, E theta is not 0, but E phi actually will work out to 0. You can easily check for yourself. Whatever is 0 in E is not 0 in H, and other way around. ER is not 0, E theta is not 0, E phi is 0. In case of H field, H phi is not 0, but other two are 0. Duality is there. But very interesting expressions. A simple, small, thin wire is giving you so much in terms of mathematics. Imagine what will happen if you go to real antennas. This antenna is the building block based on which we actually will theorize about a lot of other antennas. We may be reusing some of these formulas rather than deriving them again and again. Other interesting aspect to notice is that forget everything else. Just look at R dependence, the distance dependence on the radiated field. HR, of course, has no R dependence. It is 0 anyway. H theta is 0. Don't worry about it. In H phi, what happens? You have got 1 upon R common throughout. If you take that inside the bracket, you actually are, 1 minute. You actually are looking at j beta divided by R plus 1 upon R square within the brackets. If you take 1 upon R inside. So you have got a term depending on 1 upon R, you have got a term depending on 1 upon R square. As you travel away and away from the antenna, the effect of 1 upon R square term starts decreasing faster, much faster. After a certain value of R, you may ignore that term completely and start worrying only about 1 upon R term. 1 upon R term is known as far field component, while 1 upon R square term is the near field component. It is significant only when you are closer to the antenna. And if you go further, in ER and E theta also you see something similar. In ER, what I have got actually, if I take 1 upon R inside the brackets, I don't have a 1 upon R term at all. There is no far field. All I have got is 1 upon R square term and 1 upon R cube term. So if you go sufficiently far away from the antenna, ER would be almost zero. Only in near field, ER will not be zero. In far field, it would almost vanish. How about E theta? Okay, if you take 1 upon R inside, you see 1 upon R square, and 1 upon R cube, 3 terms. 1 upon R would survive even in the far field, but the other two will disappear. So E theta will remain non-zero even when you are sufficiently far away. What I'm trying to tell you is that in far field conditions, when you are sufficiently away from the antenna, E theta and H phi will be the only two components that would survive. That would still be significantly large. ER can be ignored for far field conditions, at least in this particular case, because there is no 1 upon R term in ER. Unfortunately, this far field condition does not apply in all practical cases. For wireless communication, it is very good to have this assumption. But other cases like biomed applications of electromagnetics, where antennas are involved, most of the time the patient is very close to the antenna. There you have to worry about near field also, very seriously. So just to give you a word of caution, don't think that far field assumption is always the right one. It depends on the practical application. Okay, so this is the basic analysis. Now, okay, actually I'm writing it also here. Far fields. That means R is sufficiently large so that 1 upon R square, 1 upon R cube can be involved, can be ignored. I get only E theta and H phi as the significant components. Others are not. Some of them were zero anyway, even in the near field. But ER was not zero in the near field, but for far field it is zero. So out of the 6 field components in far field, only 2 would matter. E theta and H phi. And the formulas also become little simpler. I ignore 1 upon R square and 1 upon R cube terms in all the formulas. What I get is equation 22 and 26 for E theta and H phi. And interestingly enough, if you divide E theta by H phi, try to do it yourself. Oh, by the way, in some cases I don't show e to the power j omega t all the time, but it is there. In some cases I do show it. If I divide E theta by H phi, everything cancels out except eta, or eta naught rather. This is far field, of course, not near field. E theta divided by H phi in far field at least is simply eta naught, 120 pi ohms. The E field component divided by H field component in far field of the Hurrian dipole antenna is simply 120 pi. Other thing, of course, is that this is also a uniform plane wave. If you look at it carefully, look at these two formulas for E theta and H phi carefully, you have got e to the power j omega t minus beta r type of term. So if you are looking for constant phase surfaces, they would mean omega t minus beta r equal to constant. Something we did in electromagnetics course also. This means there is a phase velocity involved, which can be obtained by differentiating both sides of equation 27 with time and defining phase velocity v as dr by dt, which works out to omega by beta. We had assumed it anyway, but I'm proving it rigorously here. So the phase velocity or the velocity of the signal, velocity of the radiated signal is omega by beta. For air, it is easy to figure out as 2 pi f lambda divided by 2 pi, because beta is 2 pi by lambda. So for air medium or for free space medium, this speed is almost equal to the speed of light. The radiated signal travels in air medium or in free space medium at the speed of light, approximately speaking. This is a side effect of all the analysis, something that we knew intuitively, but we can now show it mathematically also. So, okay, these are the field components of a Hertzian dipole antenna. Another interesting parameter that we are always worried about is the power radiated by the antenna. And that is actually written in terms of power density first. There is a vector called Poynting vector. Book uses capital P symbol. I'm using capital S. Not a big issue either way. This vector units are watt per meter square. That means power radiated per unit area from the antenna is what you're looking at. It is defined as 1/2 real part of E cross H complex conjugate. There's a reason why it is defined that way, but let's stick to the definition given by Mr. Poynting long time ago. And I could possibly apply this definition in near field as well as in far field to calculate the Poynting vector of the Hertzian dipole in near field and far field both. In this case, I am looking only at far field right now. Okay, I'm not. Actually, no, I'm sorry. I'm actually looking at near field right now in this document. Yes. Because I've got 1/r square term, etc. also involved. Okay. These are long derivations. You should be doing them by yourself. I'm only giving you the overview and you'll have the document to help you out. In the near field, ER will be there, E theta will be there, E phi, let's say in theory it's there. I know in practice one of them will disappear, I know that. And HR, H theta, H phi, I'm putting for the sake of completeness all of them right now in equation 32. And H components have got complex conjugate sign on them. That is the way the vector product of E and H complex conjugate is defined in a spherical coordinate system. So what happens to Poynting vector, which will actually help us in calculating the total power radiated from this antenna? If I expand the right hand side of equation 32, I get R component of E cross H complex conjugate as E theta H phi complex conjugate minus E phi H theta complex conjugate. Okay. I plug in the values of E theta and H phi and E phi and H theta from what I have done already. And I take complex conjugate for H components. It's a fairly involved derivation. Actually, it gives me headaches every time I do it. But if because of the complex conjugate operation, e to the power minus j beta r cancels out with e to the power plus j beta r. So in Poynting vector, e to the power minus j beta or e to the power plus j beta terms are not there for sure. And for the rest of the story also, whenever you take H component, make sure you apply conjugation to do the math. That's what I'm trying to do here. You can go back to the formulas that are available in the document in the beginning, not in the beginning, but somewhere in the middle, and double check that I have in fact done the conjugation in trying to do this derivation. You see that instead of j beta, I'm having minus j beta in the second pocket because of the conjugation. 1 upon r is of course real, so conjugation doesn't matter. Okay. So simplifying all this, lot of terms in the result cancel each other, even in near field. Pointing vector, interestingly, is not that complicated when you get to the end of it. What I'm getting is R component is simply beta square plus 1 upon j beta r cube, and the entire thing multiplied by some big factor outside. And of course, sine square theta is there, not sine theta, because of the multiplication of E and H fields. Similarly, for R component, this is the final formula that I'm getting. Fine. This is all near field, by the way, right now. For theta, I again do the operation using the formulas that I've got. Fairly complicated, but again, things cancel out. Some things at least cancel out. What I get is this. The pointing vector's theta component turns out to be of the form given by equation 35. And phi component of pointing vector, of course, you have to apply half RE in the beginning. Yes, I know that. You will have to do that. But you can see that if E cross H complex conjugate is 0, S phi would also be 0. So what I'm getting here actually is S having 3 components in spherical coordinate system, and S phi definitely going to 0. And SR is half RE of this thing, and E cross H complex conjugate R magnitude has already been calculated in the beginning of this page. I plug it there, and similarly for theta, I plug it there. What I get is R component of pointing vector given by this formula. Please do it yourself once. Theta component given by this formula, which actually turns out to be 0, interestingly. Once you plug in all the values, you will see that everything cancels out within brackets. Even in near field, it seems that pointing vector has only R component. And in far field, of course, that would be the case, for sure. Try proving it to your satisfaction. Took me a while to even get to this point. Book doesn't actually do it all in so many details. Some books do, some don't. So pointing vector will have only radial component, only SR component, even in the near field. And in far field, of course, ER will go to 0, E phi will go to 0, HR would go to 0, H theta would go to 0. Only E theta and H phi would survive in the far field. So you can see that only SR will be there. That's a given anyway. The interesting thing to remember is that pointing vector has only R component even in the near field, of course in the far field also. And the value of that component is given by this complicated formula that nobody in the world, I think, can remember. You have to have it in front of you all the time. SR value, where is it? Somewhere down there. Yeah, here. This is the one. Okay, SR. What is this? Okay, I'm writing only the far field in equation 42. I'm ignoring the near field. That's why I'm putting only first term. Okay. So I think that's enough. S phi is 0. S theta is 0. SR actually can be further simplified by bringing in beta in the game. as we did in the field components. This is the formula normally given in the books for SR. Where the far field is considered, only the far field is considered. SR actually is proportional to 1 upon R square in the far field. In the near field, it is little more complicated. S theta and S phi are 0 anyway. So the simple equation for S is SR multiplied by unit vector along the R direction, where SR is given by 42, at least in the far field. Pointing vector, as I said, represents power radiated per unit area by the antenna. Okay. Yeah, in fact, there's some further simplification of SR. Starting from this formula, eta naught beta square I square dl square sine square theta divided by 32 pi square R square. 32, by the way, has come because 4 pi was there, and then something happened in the derivation. Try to double check. 2, 2 is there on the outside, so that has made it 32 here. Okay. Please double check all these derivations. I think I'm correct, but you never know. It's mind-boggling to see what we are doing even with a small piece of wire. Okay, we know that beta is omega divided by C, assuming air medium. If I use the definition in the formula for SR, I get another form of SR, which is also given in the books a lot. It is equation 46. That is another way of saying the same thing. Eta naught divided by 2, which means 60 pi for air. And then you have something within the brackets which is squared, omega I dl sine theta divided by 4 pi RC. C is the speed of light. For non-air or non-free space medium, take these formulas with appropriate modifications. Don't jump to equation 46 if you have non-air medium. You'll have to go back to the equation in the beginning and appropriately modify things. Okay. Now, I think I will not go too far anymore, but at least give you an idea. I'll give you an idea of what is to follow. Your objective is to calculate the total radiated power. And by the way, before we even go there, let's look at what are the factors that are governing the power density produced by the antenna. Omega 2 pi f, 2 pi is constant, so frequency square is involved in power density. Current square is involved. Length square is involved. If the longer the antenna, as long as it is not too long, because then the assumptions of constant current, etc., will fail anyway. But if you have reasonably small antenna and you double the length, the radiated power density will be multiplied by 4. Okay. And sine square theta is involved in radiated power density. R square is involved. If you double the distance at which you are observing S value, the value will go down by a factor of 4. And if you go back to the field components, let's look at it carefully once, at least in the far field. Let me go back. Before I go to power calculations, it's a good idea to get a feel for what is. Oh, by the way, yeah, I forgot to mention. 1 upon R term, of course, is known as far field term or far field simply. 1 upon R square term is given a special name called induction field term. There's a reason for it. It's given in the book. It follows the law of induction. But don't worry too much about proving it. There is a specific name for 1 upon R square term. 1 upon r cube term has been given a specific name, electrostatic term. 1 upon r square and 1 upon r cube terms taken together are known as near field terms. Something just to know. Okay, now far field. E theta is depending on beta, which is 2 pi divided by lambda. That means E theta actually is depending on 1 upon lambda, which means it is directly proportional to frequency. 1 upon lambda means proportional to frequency. It depends on the current linearly, it depends on the length linearly, it depends on sine theta linearly. E to the power minus j beta r is anyway only a phase component. It will not change the magnitude of the field. And of course, E theta changes inversely. It is inversely proportional to the distance. If at a certain distance you see E theta equal to, let's say, 2 millivolt per meter, you double the distance, it will go to 1 millivolt per meter. Okay, as simple as that. H phi, almost similar story, because E theta and H phi anyway are proportional to each other by eta naught factor. So same thing that we saw for E theta will apply to H phi also. H phi is proportional to frequency, proportional to length, proportional to current, proportional to sine theta, and inversely proportional to r. Okay.